Good morning and welcome to Worldwide Wisdom. The question is, why do the Jewish people in Israel not want to go to the army? Why do the religious Jews not want to go to the army? I was in a taxi the other day. The guy picked me up at the airport. Tel Aviv Ben Gurion Airport. And he was a Hasidic driver. Okay, very nice. Give me a ride to Jerusalem, no problem. While we're in the car, I ask him, no. So what do people in your community say about going to the army? His answer, 3 words, was chilling. His answer was chilling in 3 words. He said to me, Lamut velo litgayes. Lamut. I'd rather die velo litgayes and not enlist. That was his answer. And I mean, I didn't respond like you did, Marty. But that's what he said. Now, I understood a little bit where he was coming from, but I played stupid and I kept on asking him. Let me tell you, I had so much fun in my taxis. All my taxi drivers, I just grilled everyone. The problem was some of them were Arabs. And it was hard to tell if they were Arabs or Jews sometimes, because, like a Sephardic Jew, it's hard to tell. And then he pulls out his phone. I see everything's in Arabic. I'm like, okay, what's your questions, No, you got to be careful with the questions that you ask, like about Gaza and how to deal with Gaza and those kind of things. But, there's one taxi driver was telling me, I think he might have been an Arab as well. He said to me, we got to get all the hostages back, and then we crush them. That's what he said. We got to get all the hostages wherever we can. It was just, maybe he wasn't an Arab. I couldn't tell. Sorry, whatever.
Was an Arab?
It probably wasn't. It probably wasn't Arab. It was a Jew who texted in Arabic. Anyways, so where am I going with this, folks? Why would this Hasidic driver say to me, Stephanie, can you understand what he said? Why would he say, Lamut v'lo nitgayes, I'd rather die than enlist in the army? I turned around to him and I said, one second, who exactly is going to protect you? Would you want the ISIS to protect you? Who do you want to protect you?
Hashem.
That's exactly what he said. Of course. He said Hashem. So, what
a terrible idea.
What a terrible idea?
Yeah, when we had to go and conquer Israel, what did Moses say to Reuben and half the tribe of Manasseh? Go in and go fight
him first. Okay. So Andy, with all due respect, and I have a lot of respect for you. By the way, yeah, for him.
He actually should be going tonight.
No, seriously, Andy, I have a lot of respect for you, but I want you to know this topic is a very, very sensitive topic, very controversial topic, and it behooves us to understand it because it's correct, like Andy brings up. He brings up historical precedent, and that's why I say to you, with all due respect, I'm going to go down your rabbit hole. You're going to bring up historical precedent? Let's go down historical precedent, okay? How did the Jewish people respond to such troubles in our history, right? Those who fail to learn the lessons of history are doomed to repeat them. How did the Jewish people respond to existential threats? Did they turn to God or did they turn to their guns? Guns or God? Which one? Now, Andy suggested right away that they first and foremost, when the Jewish people were entering into the promised land and they needed to conquer the land, they asked, when 2.5 tribes wanted to stay on the other side of the Jordan, they wanted to stay in the Syria area, right? Area of Damascus, area of Beirut. When they wanted to stay there, Moses said to them, you can stay there as long as you go out and fight, which seems to indicate that they were warriors who were fighting, right? And in fact, the warriors of God were the most brutal of the warriors of Israel. They were... Their corpses were the corpses of their victims were easily noticeable because what they would do is with one fell swoop, they would take off the head and the right arm in one fell swoop.
And the right arm?
The head and the right arm. That was brutal. Their victims, that God was here when you would see the victims with their head and the right arm in one piece, separate from the rest of the body. That's how they would fight, right? So clearly, Jews know how to fight, and Jews need to know how to fight, right? That's pretty gruesome, right? But sorry if it wasn't age appropriate. I apologize. Okay. So why would my taxi driver tell me that he does not want to go to the army? Now there's 2 parts to his answer. There's what's bad with the army, and then there's what's good about God. Okay. Now I'm trying to figure out which one I want to go down or which path I want to go. I think I'm going to go down first the second one. First, I'm going to talk about what's good about God. Why because I think this is the most fundamental part. The fact about the army, that's almost tangential. We'll talk about that after if we have time. So when we go down historical precedent, we read in Purim. This week is Purim. Purim is the genocide that almost happened, right? It's funny how we Jews get accused of genocide when we are the people that were facing genocide more than anyone else. The reason I think is like this, because when other nations face genocide, they just got killed. When we face genocide, we keep on bouncing back at the 11th hour. We just experience miracles because we are a nation blessed by God with the gift of eternity. It's a pretty cool blessing, right? Okay. It's pretty cool to have like this 9 lives thing. I mean, forget the cat of 9 lives. We have like 9,000 lives. Yeah, it's like endless amount of lives. It's amazing. So what happens here is that when the Jewish people were in Persia, we're talking 2,200 years ago, relatively modern times. We're not talking about in biblical times. We're not talking about in times of miracles of the splitting of the sea, the Torah coming down from Mount Sinai. You're not talking about the clouds of glory, the 10 plagues. You're not talking about those kind of miracles. You're talking about the Jewish people living in Shushan, which is, it's a town in Iran, in Persia, where that was a superpower at the time. We have America, it used to be Greece, used to be Rome. Now it was Persia. The Iranians were the superpower at the time. And what happened? So in the Achashverosh becomes king. Let's do a little timeline quickly. Achashverosh becomes king. Then he, in the 3rd year of his reign, he was a little insecure at the beginning of his reign because he used to be a stable boy in the stables of King Belshazzar of Babylon. When the Persians conquered the Babylonians, he jumped ship. So he used to be a stable boy in Babylon by Belshazzar, who was the grandson of Nebuchadnezzar, who destroyed our first temple. Right? So here he is, and he's a little insecure, a little imposter syndrome. But in the 3rd year of his reign, he felt comfortable enough to cement his rule with a wild orgy party where he celebrates a party with 187 days. This is the opening scene of the Megillah. At that party, he executes his wife in a drunken stupor. And then they seek out a new wife for the king. There's a beauty pageant across the world. It takes 4 years until in year 7 of his reign, Esther is nominated as queen. All this time, Mordechai is a very important person. He was Yoshev Bishar HaMelech. He would sit at the gate of the king. Now, sitting at the gate of the king didn't mean that he was just hanging out at the entrance of the palace. It meant that it was a position of status. Right? Not every vagrant or tramp could just sit there at the gate of the king. This is a guy that was considered important enough to be able to sit at the gate of the king. It was an important position. So Mordechai was a man of influence, and Esther was the most powerful Jewish woman in her time, and probably in Jewish history, if you think about it. Married to the monarch of the entire world, of the known world. Remember, he ruled from Ethiopia to India, Mahodavat Kush, right? Ethiopia to India, 127 provinces, and she's the queen, right? That's pretty impressive, right? So she's a very, very influential lady. Now, that's year 7, she becomes queen. 5 years later, to year 12 of his reign, now Haman rises, and Haman comes up with a grand idea. He wants to offer the king 10,000 talents of silver in order to get the rights to the Jews. To get the rights to annihilate the Jews, the king says, you know what? Great idea, and don't bother about the payment. You can keep the money. Right? That's what happens. Fantastic. So now Haman is just being given the royal signet ring. Good morning, Stu. Given the royal signet ring. You want to pull up a chair over there, maybe? Right there. Given the royal signet ring to basically do with the Jews whatever he wants. So remember the sequence, right? Year 3, Vashti is executed. Year 7, Esther is instituted as queen. Mordechai is already a man of great influence. He's the leader of the Jewish people. Year 12 rises Haman. Now, let me ask you a question. What would happen if we were in similar circumstance today? If we were in a similar circumstance today, where the wife of the president of the United States of America was a Jewess. Imagine if the wife of the president of the United States of America was a Jewess, and one of his chief advisors was a Jew. Now, we're not talking about Blinken. Okay? No, we're not talking about people like, right. Exactly. It's a good point.
Bernie Sanders.
We're not talking about.
No.
We're not talking about. No, you're right. No, you're right. The whatever it's called, the second man, the first man, whatever it's called. We're not talking about that. We're talking about somebody that truly was a God-fearing person. I'm not talking about a very secular Jew like a Bernie Sanders kind of character.
Yeah, Joe Lieberman.
Yeah, like a Joe Lieberman,
Joe
exactly.
Lieberman.
Joe Lieberman is a Jew that was observant. He had the courage of his convictions. He was Shomer Shabbos. He kept kosher. He would walk to the Congress on Shabbos. Right? Imagine you had a Jew like that. Right? Very good example. Now, by the way, Joe wasn't a Republican or a Democrat. I think he was independent. Right? Very good example. So we're not offending anybody right now. Good.
He would lay tefillin on the plane with, I guess.
Air Force One.
Yeah.
He would like to fill in Air Force One. Fantastic. Good. So here you go. What would happen if Joe Lieberman was the chief advisor in the White House and the first lady was a Jewish woman? I'm talking about an observant Jewish woman like in Esther. And then suddenly comes up a threat from Hamas, comes up on October 7th, right? Comes on October 7th. What would be the Jewish reaction? What should be the Jewish reaction? No, what should the Jews do? What action should the Jewish people take?
Go after the-
What should they do? The Jews are going to call a meeting, right? We're going to call a meeting around this table, and we're going to decide how we're going to solve the war. What are you going to do? What would you decide?
Shut down the electricity.
Attack it.
Guys, keep it simple, guys. Well, what's the first action that you would take?
Declare war.
The first action you would take is make a phone call to Mr. Joe Lieberman and Mrs. First Lady, right? And you'd say, please exercise maximum influence on the powers at be, the leaders of the United States of America, to do what? To crush them, to win the war, right? That's obviously the first move we would make. However, in the Purim story, that's not the first move that they made. In the Purim story, though Mordechai was so powerful and Esther was so influential, that is not what they did. What did Mordechai do? The first thing he did, Vayikras begadov, he tore his clothing, vayilbash sak va'ifer, and he wore sackcloth and ashes. Vayitzei b'sei cha'ir, and he went amidst the city, vayizak ze'aka g'dei mara, and he cried out a great call, which was distressed. What he did is he indulged into teshuva. I don't know if the word is indulged. That's not the right word. He engaged in teshuva. He engaged in penitence and teshuva and inspiring his people. Can you imagine what it would look like if Joe Lieberman would go out to on national television, right? And they would ask him, so Joe, Mr. Lieberman, what do you think about the war on October 7th? And imagine he came out with ashes on his head and he's wearing sackcloth. Can you imagine what that would look like? You'd be like, Mr. Lieberman, is everything okay? And he's wearing sackcloth. He says, my heart is broken because my people need to repent. Can you imagine what? And you'd be like, what? Why didn't he pull some strings? What a waste of influence, right? Like, why is he getting on CNN with sackcloth and ashes and saying Tehillim? Like, why is he praying on the news conference when what you should be doing is securing the political lines of influence to win the war? Now, Esther, what does Esther do? Instead of going to solicit the king, she does nothing like that. Esther declares, Leich kanoi says, Kol HaYehudim, go and gather all of the Jews, v'tzumu alai, and fast for 3 days. Yeah, in 3 days, nobody shall eat or drink. There should be a national fast day of 3 days. Can you imagine? Imagine Esther, the first lady, and she's giving her press conference, and she says, I want everybody to know that because of October 7th, nobody should be eating or drinking from this moment on for the next 72 hours. What would that make you feel, Chuck? If you saw the first lady saying that on national television.
The Jews, though.
Would that be disheartening? No. Yeah, but on national television to the Jews and the friends of the Jews, right? Would that be disheartening? Like, oh my God, if she's praying, that's not a good sign, right? Right? It's like, imagine you're invested in a company like GM or GE, right? You see the CEO praying. What does that tell you? What are you going to do? Sell stock immediately, right? So you see the queen, you see Queen Esther, and she's praying, heaven help us, right? This is deeply concerning, right? Now, when it comes to the Megillah, there's a law in the Megillah, in Purim, which says that whoever reads the Megillah backwards, has not fulfilled his obligation. Why would anybody read the Megillah backwards? And this is before the invention of recordings and rewinding and double speed, right? You could technically play the Megillah backwards on a recording. It sounds like the rewind, right? But technically you do it. But why would the Torah need to tell us this? Why would the Torah need to tell us this 2,000 years ago? By the way, if anybody is thinking of reading the Megillah backwards, like, how could you possibly read the Megillah backwards? Says Rab, that it's actually the Baal Shem Tov who says. The Baal Shem Tov teaches us, he opens up our eyes and he tells us that the meaning of this law, like any Talmud, is so much more than meets the eye. The Talmud is in code form. You can't ever take Talmud at face value. It's in code. When it says that you can't read the Megillah backwards, what it means is that you can't read the Megillah as a story of ancient history, which is not relevant to our current reality right now. And someone who does that, someone who reads the Purim story as a story that was relevant only to them in those ancient times, but not relevant to us today, such a person has not fulfilled his obligation, because that story is our story. His story is my story. In fact, there is no word in Hebrew, as I've said before, there's no word for history. You cannot say the word history in Hebrew. You can say historia, but that's not a Hebrew word, right? History, there's no such word for it in Hebrew. Why? Because we don't believe that anything is irrelevant to today. What happened then is relevant right now. So we have to analyze the Jewish reaction then to understand the Jewish reaction now, because we're facing the same existential threat by the same people, by the way. Then it was Iran trying to annihilate us. Right now it's Iran trying to annihilate us as well. It's what do they call it? The axis of evil, the octopus. What do they call it? The octopus diplomacy. The tentacles, right? Whether it was Syria or Houthis. By the way, the Houthis have given us an ultimatum, right? 4-day ultimatum. You heard about this? Right? If we don't resume electricity to Gaza or something, then they're going to start attacking us. I mean, those guys, they're messing with fire, right? But you got the Houthis, you got Hamas, you got the Hezbollah, you got the Syrian rebels, you got the various groups, whatever, they're all tentacles of the same octopus of Iran. It's Iran all over again, just 2,200 years later. Yet, what is the Jewish reaction? So the Jewish reaction is to say, they attacked us. The first thing we have to do is to go out and fight. That is not the Jewish response, Andy. The Jewish response of Purim is to understand what started this problem in the first place. Understand the source. The problem here is, why do they hate us? That's the problem. What's the obsession with the Jews? And that is a deep, personal, what's the word for this? Regulation. A self-regulation. We have to self-regulate to face the hard fact. Let me just finish this point. Just finish the sentence. We have to self-regulate and to come to the realization that, you know why they hate us? Stop shooting the messenger. The reason why they hate us is because God promised us that when we stray from his way, he will send us anti-Semites to wake us up. That's why. It comes all over the Torah. Too much wake up. You know what that means? Too much slumber. That's what it means. You wouldn't have too much wake up if you weren't sleeping so much. Right? Now, I know this is a difficult pill to swallow, folks. I know it's a difficult pill to swallow. But I hate to tell you, but it's in the instruction manual of the Jewish people. It's actually stated clearly, black on white, that, for a quick example, when Isaac blesses Esau. Esau's the first anti-Semite, right? Trying to kill Jacob. When he blesses him, here's the blessing that he says to him. He says, listen, I've made your brother Jacob dominant over you. There's nothing you can do about that. However, the only blessing I can give you, and it shall be that when he rebels from Torah and mitzvahs, then you will be able to attack him. That's the blessing that Isaac gives to Esau, the first anti-Semite. And by the way, God promises that's enough already. Right there is enough to be able to see the blessing of the first anti-Semite. Go ahead.
With just a limited shelf life, because just like when Pharaoh and his army were pursuing the Jews, God said, "Now is not the time to pray. Now just go forward." So, recognize the source of the problems, but then pick up.
Okay, fine. I'll get to that. I will get to that in a moment. Let me just tie it up all together and say the following. So it's when we are able to have that difficult discussion with ourselves, and to say, guys, let's face it. Okay, let's face it. Nobody hates the Greeks like they hate the Jews. Nobody hates the Polynesians or the New Zealanders or the Americans or anybody. Nobody gets hated like the Jews get hated. Let's face it, the world loves to hate us more than anybody else. Disproportionate. Have you seen Did you see the amazing, the overwhelming condemnation of the United Nations this weekend over the executions in Syria? Did you hear about it? Neither did I. Right?
Yeah.
Silence is deafening. The silence is deafening. They're murdering the Alawites, right? They're murdering them. They're humiliating them. They're beheading. They're terrible. What's happening over there? No Jews, no news, folks. If there's no Jews to blame, nobody cares. You saw Trafalgar Square. There was like nothing. You could see every. I saw a picture of Trafalgar Square. There was nothing. There was no people there, right? One Palestinian kid gets shot by a errant Hamas rocket, and they fill it up. It's genocide, right? Yeah, they're massacring thousands of Alawites in Syria. They're massacring them. They can't even keep count how many are being killed. And you only hear one peep. Why? Because the United Nations has a systemic bias against the Jewish people. The nations of the world have a bias against the Jewish people. Now, let's not shoot the messenger. It comes from God. Now, I'm not blaming the victim. Please understand. I'm not blaming the victim. I'm not saying it's the Jews' fault that the Jews are responsible for anti-Semitism. The perpetrators of evil are going to be held accountable for their crimes. Okay, but at the end of the day, just like in therapy, when you get triggered by your spouse, for example. If you get triggered by your spouse, right? You have a choice. You can either say, my spouse is evil and therefore I'm going to divorce her. Or you could be mature and say, why is this triggering me? Why is this triggering me? It's called a trailhead. A trailhead means my spouse just touched on something which is extremely sensitive within me. Why? And then if you follow the trailhead down to the core, you'll discover some early childhood trauma or unprocessed emotion where you'll realize that I have my parents ignored me, my mother was evil, my father was whatever, and my father would scream at me, whatever it was, and you'd realize that you have this unprocessed trauma within you, so you need to work on it. So there's two approaches. You can either be immature and blame the wife and divorce her, or you can be mature and self-regulate and try to process the emotions and the trauma to be able to reach a point where you're able to come to a state of healing. Now, that doesn't mean that the spouse is entirely guiltless. Maybe what the spouse said was mean. Maybe what the spouse said wasn't nice, and that needs to be addressed. You have to have a conversation. You have to have a conversation with the spouse and say, look, I'd appreciate it if you'd be more sensitive to my triggers. Or maybe what you said wasn't so nice, right? But still, a mature person takes responsibility in much the same way as Jews, instead of just coming out with an elephant gun and shooting at anything which has the word anti-Semite on it, we can say, 1 second, let's reflect a little deeper and understand why do they hate us. The promise in Torah is that God says, you're going to sleep, I'm going to send you a wake-up call. If you're going to sleep, I'm going to send you a wake-up call. And when that wake-up call comes, what are you supposed to do? Don't break the alarm clock. Maybe you should be waking up. And therefore, when it comes to our story here in Purim, Esther and Mordechai understood this. They understood that Haman didn't come out of a vacuum. They understood that the Jewish people were in a state of a spiritual slumber, and therefore they needed to reverse the root of the problem. How did they reverse the root of the problem? What they did was that they called the people to teshuvah. Mordechai gets on television with his sackcloth and ashes, right? And Esther comes out with a cry for a 3-day fast, and the people do teshuvah, right? In exactly the same way, that is what we need to be doing right now. Just give me a moment. Let me just finish my point. I'll get you. Don't worry. I'll get you, Mark. So we need to be doing teshuvah right now. That's what we need to be doing instead of hiding behind our computer screens and forwarding ridiculous emails as if we're going to solve anti-Semitism because we forwarded to all of our friends 12,000 emails about every analysis of every an anti-Semite. That's not going to solve the problem. The core of the problem is our spiritual slumber. That the Jewish people are in a state of a spiritual coma. You want to make a difference? Go out and lay tefillin with yourself, lay tefillin with your neighbor, lay tefillin with your fellow Jew. And that's what the yeshiva students are doing in Israel. They're going out there saying what this taxi driver of mine was saying. He says, look, our people are under threat. The threat ultimately, essentially comes from God. And therefore, we need to neutralize the problem at the core. If you have a disease in your body, which manifests in a skin disease, right? There's 2 ways to treat it. You can do a topical cream, or you can take a pill that cleanses the bloodstream, right? The pill the cream might be quicker. The cream might be quicker. It will take away the symptoms quicker. But the pill will cleanse much deeper. So when you take the cream, you put it on the arm, it might show up on the knee, it might show up on the shoulder, right? Because you only cleansed it in that spot. But when you take out the pill, when you take the pill and you cleanse out the bloodstream, now you're making a long-term difference, right? And that's what's happening when we're responding to the war with military or you're responding with spiritual, right? When the yeshiva students go to the yeshiva students, right? When they go to the yeshiva and they study Torah, what are they doing? They're awakening the Jewish people to their relationship with God, and that's a beautiful thing. Now, are these two exclusive? The answer is absolutely not. Back to the Purim story. You can't read the story in retrospect. They fasted for 3 days, and that's when Esther came in to exercise her diplomacy. She comes in and gives it everything she's got. She seduces the king, and she does whatever is necessary in order to secure that kind of influence that she needed. But that came only as a second resort, not as a primary resort. And that's a very critical difference I need to understand. So today, when we come to the war, we are facing a Purim story. We're having a Purim story in real time. Can you imagine 2,000 years from now that we're reading our story like it's a Purim story? This October 7th war, right? October rain. So what happens? We have a choice right now, folks. We have a choice of being comatose and responding with weapons, or being conscious and responding with words and with wisdom, with Torah. With Torah. You're struggling with this, right?
Yeah.
Okay, did I not explain it?
No, what I'm
I did not explain it?
what I'm struggling with is, if I understand you correctly, the reason for anti-Semitism is our own choosing. That we
I didn't say our own choosing.
Our own choice.
Our own spiritual neglect.
Well, that's a choice. So
Yes.
Right. So it's of our own choosing.
doing.
So
It's our own doing.
the
Yeah, it's our own
antithesis of that is
choosing.
if we were all the most observant Jews and did everything that the Torah required of us.
Yeah, that would be.
There'd be no anti-Semitism.
That would be the antithesis, correct?
It's a hard,
You find that hard to believe? How about we try it? I'll make you a deal. Let's try it. Let's get the Jewish people to a state of spiritual consciousness, and we'll see what happens. Is it worth a shot? Hey, if that's going to cure, listen to me, Chuck, a second. Nothing else we've ever tried has cured anti-Semitism. Agreed? Right. Very good. Nothing else we've ever tried to work. So I think it's worth a shot. Okay? We've got nothing to lose, that's for sure. It's not like anything else we're trying is going to be neglected right now because some other attempt is going to work. Anti-Semitism has never been cured. The one thing we haven't tried is what it actually says in the operating manual of the world in the Torah. Right? That's the one thing we haven't actually tried. I think it's worth a shot. Go ahead.
Why do you think all the Arab nations, with all their people and all their weapons or whatever, don't attack Israel? Because they're afraid of the Jewish people's God? No, they're afraid of Israel's might.
By the way, I think you're not giving them enough credit. I think they are afraid of the Jewish people's God.
No.
You ask them. I think they are.
There's when somebody went to Stalin and said the Pope is very upset as to what you're doing. Stalin said, "How many brigades, how many battalions does the Pope have?" He didn't care about whether it was right or wrong, whether it was moral or immoral. It was about strength. And here too, you know what? After we defeat the Arabs with our might and our strength, then maybe we can.
Okay, so I'm going to say this. I'm going to say this to you. I'm going to say to you, I guess. They're not mutually exclusive. Okay. Of course, we need an army. Of course, nobody's saying, I'm not suggesting that we don't need an army. But what I am suggesting is that when we become a secular people of Israelis, not Jews, that don't keep Shabbos and don't keep kosher and don't study Torah and don't cherish our heritage and our Jewish values. If we stray from those values and we're fighting as if we were another nationality, that is the worst thing we could possibly do. However, on the flip side, if we are an army which is God-fearing and proud, an army which has a Torah and has a mitzvahs and has mezuzahs and has kosher food and has Shabbos observant sensitivities, right? Obviously, you're going to have to violate the Shabbos in many cases because you're at war. But when you're doing so within the context of Torah law, right? When you're fighting the battle as proud Jews, not just as Israelis, now you're on to the recipe of success. And that's the lesson that we learn from Esther. When our primary identity is our spiritual relationship with God, and our weapons of war are merely a tool to reach our goals, fine. But if our identity is our weapons, like you just described, that how many brigades does he have? If we're defined by the size of our weapons, I want to tell you, we are outgunned, we are outnumbered, and the prospects of our survival are so low, you wouldn't even bet on it. Just want to go to Mark, because Mark has been waiting for a while.
Thank you. I have trouble with this concept because God is almighty, God is all powerful, and the idea that when we sleep, it's going to fuel anti-Semitism. I have a problem.
Okay, so I appreciate your honesty. I really appreciate your honesty saying that you have a problem with understanding that when we're in a state of spiritual slumber, then that brings about problems upon us. But I want you to know this is a foundational principle in Jewish spirituality. It's a foundational principle, and it's worth allowing yourself to experience this chiropractic readjustment, because I think a lot of people have this notion of God as just being this really nice guy who should be giving me everything for no reason, and therefore is underwhelming in his performance over the past 5,000 years, right? And that's why we've actually made an executive decision to walk away from this God thing, because and I think a lot of people are there. They're like, God should be doing everything, and since he's doing so little, therefore I'm walking away. But that's not actually a Jewish belief. The Jewish belief is, I'm going to quote the book of Psalms, Hashem tzilcha, God is your shadow. God is your shadow, man. You know what it means, God is your shadow? It means he follows your every move. You turn your back on God, you know what that means? He's going to turn his back on you. You turn your face to God, it means he's going to turn his face to you. You're generous to other people, God is going to be generous to you. If you're nasty to other people, God is going to be nasty to you, right? God is your shadow. So when we are turning a cold shoulder to God, then God does exactly the same thing to us. In fact, one of the, in the Megillah, it's very interesting. It's very, very interesting to bring out your point. The Maharal of Prague, it's actually quoting the Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, says that when you reach what is the most important part of the Megillah? When you reach the part where Achashverosh couldn't sleep. When you reach that part of the Megillah where Achashverosh was sleepless in Shushan, right? It says that he kept on thinking about what Mordechai did to save his life, right? And that's when Haman comes and the whole turnaround. Haman wants to hang Mordechai and ends up humiliating himself, right? So you're supposed to raise your voice at these words. On that night, the king's sleep was stirred. You're supposed to raise your voice. Why are you supposed to raise your voice? Chassidus explains like this, Mark. Listen closely. That whenever it says the word melech in the Megillah, king, it's a reference to God. Very interesting. You can read the Megillah as a reference to God. Every time it says the king, it's only one king, right? So on that night, the sleep of the king was stirred. What does it mean? What's night? Night is a time of slumber, right? What is that night versus this night? That is distant, this is near, right? So that night is a reference to a double state of unconsciousness. It's not only night, but it's a that night as opposed to a this night, right? Very sensitive, subtle discrepancy here. But the idea is that there's a double state of concealment. Just like the name Esther. What does it say, Esther, in the Torah? It comes from a term in a verse in the Torah. It says, and I shall doubly conceal. V'anochi haster aster, right? Just to explain the difference. So you have, let's say, when you sleep sometimes and you're dreaming and you know that you're dreaming, then that's a regular sleep. Then there's a slumber, and you're dreaming, you think it's real. You see the difference? Sometimes you know that it's fake, and sometimes you don't even know that it's fake, right? So the state of unconsciousness in the former is less than the state of unconsciousness in the latter, right? Here you know you're dreaming. Here you don't know that you're dreaming, right? You have a Jew that's violating all the laws of the Torah, right? So one Jew feels bad about it. One Jew is violating the laws of the Torah, feels bad about it. Okay. Then the other guy, he thinks he's doing the right thing. So who's more confused, right? The latter, right? So now, and that night, when the Jewish people were in a state of such spiritual slumber that it was a double slumber, which therefore causes God to be in a state of such a slumber, the king's sleep was stirred. The miracle was that despite their unconsciousness, God woke up and chose to intervene. That was the miracle of the Purim story.
So what aroused God?
So this is an interesting conversation. The miracle was that God decided that that without divine intervention, they were actually going to They were going to be over. So God actually interceded to make a difference, right? So the miracle was that you got to do this adjustment, Mark. You got to move away from pre-existing paradigms, and you got to say, God reflects my state of being. And if I'm awake to God, then God is awake to me. But if I'm asleep to God, then God is asleep to me. And in the story of Purim, the Jewish people were in a state of spiritual coma. They were living it's like New York City. Shushan was like Tel Aviv. Shushan was like Tel Aviv. It was like, bars and gay pride parades and just all that kind of stuff. That's what was going on Shushan, where they were just in a state of spiritual slumber. And therefore God was in a state of spiritual slumber. And that's why Esther and Mordechai understood that what needed to happen here was a change of hearts within the Jews in order to bring a change of heart from God. Yeah.
But if that was true, then why would somebody put a swastika on a Chabad shul?
If that was true, then why would somebody put a swastika on a Chabad shul? Where else is he going to put the swastika? Where else is he going to put the swastika? Okay, so look, I understand your question. You compartmentalizing. Chuck, you compartmentalizing and saying the Jews that are Chabad, those guys should be getting no anti-Semitism.
Right.
The Jews that are not, the Jews that are observant, they should be getting no anti-Semitism. Listen, we're in the same boat, my friend. Right? When part of the boat is sinking, the whole boat is sinking. We're all in this together. That's the answer. Okay.
But if
everybody's conscious, absolutely
there'd be no
correct. That's exactly. And you know what? I dare you to prove me wrong.
Good luck.
Let's try that. Okay, Stu, you had a question before. Stu.
And this, I think, goes to maybe the essence of the conflict. Basically, what you said is if Jews were more observant and they were truly pure in terms of Torah, then there wouldn't be anti-Semitism. The view of that, there's only approximately 16 million Jews in the world now, and God knows through the centuries, it's a small amount. Why do you think that hasn't been the case when in essence the numbers, the odds are that it should have been the case? What has prevented Jews from being more righteous and more observant in order to push off or to avoid anti-Semitism? You would think if that's the case, it would have occurred. Why not?
Okay, so the question is to repeat the question in case the viewers online didn't hear the question. The question is, why didn't the Jews behave the way they should have over the past 3,250 years since Moses gave us the Torah? Why have we if this is true, why is it that not one generation came up with the eureka moment that Chuck just came up with? Right? That if we just wake up to our spirituality, there'd be no more anti-Semitism, right? Why is it? I think that the reason is because it's by divine design, Stu. I think God infused within us a very, very, very seductive evil inclination. A yetzer hara, an evil inclination, which is wily, it's sly, it's cunning, it's a serpent.
So does he program Jews to fail intentionally?
Yeah, no, he didn't program us to fail, but he gave us one hell of a test. One hell of a test. So that ultimately, when we will hobble our way through, eventually, to health, to spiritual health, we will have earned it. That's why. And I believe that our generation is the one that's going to do that. There were pockets in history, by the way, that did it. There were pockets in history, like in the days of Chizkiyahu, days of King Solomon. There were certain pockets in history where the people were truly righteous. In the days of Chizkiyahu, it says that there wasn't a child who wasn't familiar with the most complex laws of Torah.
So God put the Jews to the test, but not others.
No, everybody else is props on the scene.
We are chosen.
We are the Jews, and they're there just to be our wake-up call. I mean, essentially, I hate to be, I hope that doesn't sound racist or anything. But I hope that answers your question, Stu. God put us to a test. And I want to, if you really think about it, Stu, if you put it in the context of like marital health, okay? Let's talk about marriages for a second. My favorite topic. You talk about marriages for a second, right? Let me just reflect your question back to you, right? If people would just be perfect husbands and wives, then you'd have a happy marriage, right? So, like, why don't they? What's the answer?
Because we breathe and we think and we feel and we exist.
And we have triggers, and we have protectors, and we have exiles, and we have all sorts of trailheads, right? That's why. You see the answer. But what eventually happens when kicking and screaming, we eventually make peace with the fact that we're in this marriage and it's not going anywhere. And whether we like it or not, we're going to have to do the work.
See, but that's You're conflating two things, and I think your marriage analogy is perfect.
Yeah.
If your wife is perfect and you're a jerk, the marriage isn't going to work, and vice versa. It takes two. So if you're suffering yourself and you go to a psychiatrist or psychologist, first thing they're going to work on is yourself, to make yourself like yourself, to feel good about yourself, not the external issues. You can't control that. That's one of the reasons why, if you have a hair, temper, that they tell you, look, you're not going to teach the driver who cuts you off a lesson. You have to be able to. So that's the same here. The only thing we can do by being better Jews is feel good about ourselves. It's not going to impact those that hate us. And stop thinking about it that way. Don't try to be a better Jew because you'll be liked by someone else.
Like the guy that won the Oscars. Like the guy that won the Oscar documentary, right?
Yeah, it's Steve's point. If it was that simple, we would have done it in the last 3,000 years. So let's focus on being better Jews because it makes us feel good. It's not going to change. How do you want the other people to respect you? That's when you take a gun. Walk softly, carry a big stick.
I think I was speaking to a psychologist recently, and he said to me something which is very, very beautiful. Something very beautiful. I'm not sure if I fully understand it, but I thought he said something very beautiful to me that, you know what equine therapy is?
Mm-hmm.
Horse therapy.
Yeah.
Why is equine therapy so meaningful? Because the horse reads you like a book. When you're stressed out and nervous, then the horse might kill you, right? But if you're calm, then the horse is going to be calm, right?
Sure.
So the horse in order to survive the encounter, you've got to reach a state of inner calm, right? That's what the horse does to you, right? So in much the same way, the psychologist, like a psychotherapist, whatever it was, I hope this is not insulting. He said that women are like horses. He said women are like horses. He said they have an intuition where they can read the energy of their husbands, and they can reflect that energy. It's essentially, I hope it's not insulting. But I thought it was very beautiful. And again, I'm not sure if I fully understand it. But in other words, when a man is in a state of chaos, of inner turmoil, then it manifests in a chaotic relationship. But when he's able to reach a state of inner peace, then that's reflected back by the wife. Just again, I don't claim to fully understand this.
Fake it till you make it.
It's an interesting question. If fake it till you make it applies. It's an interesting question because this is pretty deep. This is essential versus superficial. So I got to think about that. I'm not sure. I would think that fake it till you make it will bring in internal change. I think that's the answer, because we did learn from the Alter Rebbe once before that when your superficial behavior actually becomes your essential behavior. So I think it would. But let me just wrap it up because I'm so over time, folks. I so apologize for taking your time. I'm going to get to end in a second. But I want to just complete the circle here by saying that I know it sounds so unpopular for me to say. I know it sounds. Oh, so Stacy agrees with me. Thank you. It's a woman who agreed with me. Thank you. I want to just say that
1 out of 49.
that I know it sounds unpopular to say that to win the war on October 7th, which is still obviously raging, we have to study Torah. I know that it sounds unpopular, but folks, we are no longer the Jews of unconsciousness. We are the Jews of consciousness. Yes, we need an army. Of course, we need an army and diplomacy and everything else. Yes. But that's secondary to the primary weapon we have, which is our spiritual connection to God. And therefore, when my taxi driver said to me, he'd rather die than go to the army, there was some trauma there. We got to talk about that. That was a different therapy session we could have. But what he was trying to say is that I have to study Torah. We have to study Torah in order to secure divine intervention in our war zone, because the weapons alone, we're outnumbered and we're outgunned. And that's the message that we learn from Purim. Purim teaches us that we cannot read the Megillah backwards. We've got to read it in real time. It's relevant to us today, just as the story was then. And as Esther and Mordechai, they won this war by bringing the people to spiritual awakening before the political diplomacy. Same thing we have to do today. And if we make the mistake of doing it backwards, we're going to mess it all up. And God forbid, we're going to fail. Ed, you had a closing question?
Well, simple little thing. Everybody can agree that Hitler hated Jews. But who were the first ones he rounded up
and brought to Auschwitz.
Okay.
The non-religious Jews, the people that backed him.
I'm not sure that's true, but okay.
It is. Because
all of
when
them.
he emptied out Berlin.
Once you release
Okay.
the crack and everything.
Okay, so what's your point?
On a train, and only one survivor. He wrote a book many years ago about it.
Okay. So you're saying that the secular Jews were the ones sent off to Auschwitz first. Look, I'm not sure if I'm comfortable with that comment. I have to say, Ed, I love you, but I'm not sure if I'm comfortable with that comment. I'm not sure if it's historically accurate. I know you're much older than me and much more experienced than me, but I just want to reserve my response to that. But I would say, I see Al Newman is with us. Great, good to have you with us, and all the other guys that are here. I just want to conclude, folks, and say this is a war like no other war. This is not a conflict between the internal Syrian conflict between the Alawites and the ISIS people. This is not a conflict in Pakistan and India. This is a war of consciousness. That's what this war is. Any war that the Jewish people have is a war of consciousness. It's not about shooting the messenger and saying, "Oh, we've discovered a new anti-Semite." Newsflash. That's not what it's about. The anti-Semite is there to wake us up. God tells us so in the Torah ad nauseum. Ad nauseum, he says. You go to sleep, you turn your back on me, I'm going to send you a wake-up call. And sometimes it's not going to be pretty, right? It's not like this should be a surprise to us. Guys, it's in the Torah. And if we can only learn the lessons of our history, we, God willing, will be able to win this war. Amen.
Amen.